I have spent 40 years reading men by their hands, not their faces. Faces lie. Men learn that early, usually at some cost. A man's face will tell you what he wants you to see. Confidence or contrition, boredom or attention, the practiced blankness of a diplomat, or the performed fury of a bureaucrat who has mistaken volume for authority. But the hands do not get the memo. The hands carry the truth a man has forgotten he is broadcasting. The old calluses, the particular geography of scar tissue, the way the fingers curl when the body moves to stillness, and the mind goes somewhere only the body has been before. I am Oswin Crail, Brigadier, retired Keldrath 1st Regiment, 31 years of service. The last 11 of them in roles I am still not at liberty to describe in detail. I am 63 years old. I walk with a cane now, which I resent, and I attend functions like the Keldrath summer presentation because old habit will not let me refuse an invitation that arrives under the regimental seal, even when my knees have opinions about the cobblestones. I was standing near the eastern end of the South Garden Terrace, a glass of something cold and slightly too sweet in my right hand, when I first noticed the guardsman at the corner post. He was where he was supposed to be. Scarlet wool, full ceremonial dress, despite the warmth of the afternoon, brass buttons catching the light in a way that made the tourists aim their phones at him. From 20 feet away, tall black bearskin, white gloves, rifle at the carry, eyes forward fixed at a point somewhere above and beyond the crowd, which is precisely where the eyes should be. The man was motionless in the way that only a particular kind of training produces, not the stillness of a statue which is inert, but the stillness of something coiled, a system running at full load behind a surface that gives nothing away. I noted him the way a retired officer notes things at a public event, cataloged, filed, moved on. I returned my attention to a conversation with the deputy comptroller of the household, a pleasant man named Ferris, who was explaining the provenance of the garden's rosebeds with more enthusiasm than the subject warranted. I was attending to perhaps a third of it. The rest of my attention drifted, as it always does, to the periphery, the crowd, the foot traffic, the handful of men whose bearing snagged a corner of my professional memory. The group that arrived near the corner post at around 2:30 snagged more than a corner. There were 5 of them. A trade attaché from one of the northern Valdrenian districts. I did not catch his name then, and I will not use it now. And 4 members of his traveling entourage, all of them in good summer suits, all of them with the easy expansiveness of men who are accustomed to being the most comfortable people in any room. The attaché himself was a heavy-set man of perhaps 55 with close-cropped gray hair, and the particular confidence of someone who has made a great deal of money and has spent enough time in formal settings to mistake access for rank. He wore a pale linen jacket. He had a lit cigar, which was technically permitted on the eastern terrace, and which he was smoking with the deliberate leisure of a man making a point about his leisure. They stopped near the corner post. This was not unusual. The guardsman drew attention the way a feature of the garden drew attention, something people paused at and regarded before moving on. What was less usual was the attaché's decision not to move on. He said something to his entourage. I could not hear it from where I stood, but the shape of it was legible enough. The slight elevation of the chin toward the guardsman, the small curve of the mouth, the ripple of amusement through the group. One of the 4, a younger man, aide-de-camp type, said something in return that made the attaché's smile widen. The guardsman did not react. He was not expected to react. He was on post, in full ceremonial dress at a public garden event, and the understanding that civilians would stare and occasionally say things in his vicinity was baked into the duty he held. But the attaché was not done. He took a few steps closer, not to the rail. There was no rail on the eastern terrace corner, just the marked post boundary that any adult with functioning eyes could read, but close enough that his proximity became deliberate rather than incidental. He spoke again, louder this time, directing his words at the guardsman rather than the entourage. I caught the tail of it. Something about clockwork or wound up, the kind of observation that plays well to an audience of 5. The entourage obliged with laughter. The guardsman held. I had set down my conversation with Ferris by this point. Not obviously. I was still facing the controller, still holding my glass, but my eyes had moved to the corner post, and I was watching with the full attention I reserve for situations that have not yet become incidents but have acquired the particular temperature of situations that might. The attaché raised the cigar. He held it out, perhaps 18 inches from the guard's right hand, the rifle hand, gloved in white, locked at the carry. He held it there long enough for it to be unmistakable. This was not an accidental proximity. This was a test. He was waiting to see what the guardsman would do with the lit end of a cigar presented to his hand at close range, whether the discipline would crack, whether the stillness was real or performed, whether the man inside the uniform would flinch or speak or shift. I watched the guardsman's right hand. He did not flinch. He did not speak. He did not shift his grip by a millimeter. But something happened in that hand, something so small that I doubt anyone else in the South Garden saw it, because no one else in the South Garden had spent 31 years learning to read what hands do when the rest of a man goes still. The fingers resettled, not tightened. That would have been a tell, a stress response, the body betraying what the face was working to conceal. What happened was the opposite, a microscopic, deliberate redistribution of pressure, the kind of adjustment a man makes when he is resetting from a point of trained readiness to an even deeper point of controlled restraint. It was the adjustment of a man who has been in situations measurably worse than a lit cigar, who has made the precise calculation that this situation does not merit the response he is physiologically equipped to give, and who is settling back into his post with the conscious discipline of someone choosing, actively and at cost, not to act. I have seen that adjustment made before. I knew the shape of it, and then I looked at the hand more carefully. The white glove covered most of it, but the glove was fitted. Ceremonial dress gloves are fitted to the hand, and fitted gloves do not hide geography. The knuckle of the index finger sat slightly higher than standard anatomy would account for. A healed fracture not quite flush. The line of the wrist, where the glove ended at the cuff, showed a lateral ridge of scar tissue, the particular kind that comes not from a single clean cut, but from a sustained abrasion event, a rope, a rock face, a prolonged contact with something unyielding under pressure, and the thumb. The base of the thumb on his right hand had the flattened, slightly broadened profile of a joint that has been dislocated, reset, and rebuilt through use over a long period of time. I stood very still. My glass was halfway to my mouth, and I left it there, and I thought about what I was looking at. Not as an observer of a garden party. As a man who has spent 31 years in the regiment, the last 11 in roles I am not at liberty to describe, who has written citations and read files and signed orders and attended memorial services where the names on the program were not the names in the classified record, because the classified record does not attend memorial services. The Aldenmere Ridge. It is not a name that appears in any public account of the Keldrath 1st Regiment's service history. It appears in one document, a ministry brief sealed on the day it was written, not opened since except by people with very specific clearances. I have that clearance. I have read that document. It describes a close protection operation that went wrong when the intelligence package was incomplete and the ground conditions deteriorated faster than the extraction window allowed. I know how many men went in. I know how many came out. 1. The citation attached to that brief, also sealed, also classified, describes, in the careful language of official commendations, the actions of a single corporal who held a position alone under sustained pressure, who made decisions that preserved the mission at costs the citation is precise about, and who returned under his own capability when extraction was no longer viable for anyone else. It notes, among other things, an injury to the right hand sustained in the final phase, a lateral abrasion, a dislocated thumb, field resets, a fractured index finger, untreated for 72 hours because there was no one to treat it. I lowered my glass. The attaché was still performing for his entourage. He had withdrawn the cigar. The test had produced no visible result, which he was now converting into a second piece of material, apparently concerning the question of whether anyone was home behind the bearskin. His people were still amused. He was warming to it. I turned and walked across the terrace. I am 63 years old, and I walk with a cane, and I am told that I walk with it in a way that suggests I intend to arrive somewhere, rather than merely move from one place to another. I have been told this several times by people I trust. I crossed the South Garden Terrace in the direction of Colonel Rhys Aldane, who was standing near the northern end with 2 members of the household staff, and who, I was confident, had already seen everything I had seen and a good deal more besides. Aldane looked at me as I approached. He was a younger man than me, 50, perhaps, with the particular economy of expression that the regiment produces in its senior officers after sufficient years. He had a glass in his hand that I suspected had been at the same level for some time. I said, "The corner post." He said, "I know." I said, "The Aldenmere brief. I read it in 19. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Then you know what his hands cost him?" I said, "Yes." He set his glass down on the tray of a passing steward. He straightened his jacket. He walked across the terrace toward the corner post and the Valdrainian trade attaché, and he walked with the economy of a man who knows exactly what he is going to say, and has already chosen how little of it will be necessary. I did not follow. My part was finished. I watched from where I stood. The conversation, if you could call it that, took perhaps 90 seconds. I could not hear the content. I did not need to. I could read it clearly enough from where I stood. Aldane's measured approach, the way the attaché turned with the smiles still in place. The smile of a man who has been having a good afternoon and expects the new arrival to be an addition to it, and then the particular way the smile adjusted when Aldane began to speak. Not vanished, not collapsed in a single moment. Adjusted, the way a man's expression adjusts when something he believed to be solid turns out to have different properties than he assumed. By the time Aldane finished speaking, the entourage had gone quiet. The aide-de-camp had taken a half-step back, which I noted with the professional satisfaction of a man who knows what a half-step back means in a diplomatic context. The attaché's cigar had stopped moving. He was listening with the attention of a man who has understood that the cost-benefit calculation of the last 20 minutes has just been presented to him in full. I do not know exactly what Aldane told him. I have my inference. I believe he told him the guardsman's name and his rank, and the citation number of a document the attaché did not have clearance to read. I believe he told him, in the measured and entirely courteous language of a senior regimental officer at a formal garden event, what the Aldenmere Ridge cost, and what the man at the corner post did there, and what it means to press a lit cigar at the hand of a man who held that position alone. I believe he said it calmly and quietly, and that he did not need to raise his voice. The attaché left the eastern terrace shortly afterward. His entourage went with him. I watched them go, the pale linen jacket moving away through the crowd, smaller now, less certain of its own proportions than it had been 40 minutes ago. I turned back to the corner post. The guardsman had not moved. He was where he had been at the beginning of the afternoon, and where he would be at the end of it. Scarlet and brass and bearskin, rifle at the carry, eyes forward, fixed at that point above and beyond the crowd where the eyes belong. If anything had happened on the eastern terrace of the South Garden at the Keldrath summer presentation, his body offered no record of it. His face was still, his shoulders were square, his right hand, the hand with the healed fracture and the rebuilt thumb and the scar tissue at the wrist, was exactly where the duty required it to be. I raised my glass. No one saw me do it. It was not a gesture for anyone else. It was a gesture for the same reason he was standing there. Because some things are owed, regardless of audience. 40 years reading men by their hands. I have read generals and cowards and decorated liars and frightened boys who turned out to be something else, entirely when the ground conditions deteriorated and the extraction window closed. I have read them all. That hand told me everything I needed to know. He never moved. He never needed to. That was always the point.